Well, welcome once again to Fork in the Road, where we talk to the leaders in sports, business and entertainment. And you know what? I've actually been looking forward to turning the tables on this man because I know he's done thousands of interviews with everyone else. But good morning, Mike Sheahan. We finally got there after some technical difficulties.
Geez, how'd we go, Corey? An hour and a half, you and I, at the computer. And neither of us knew anything about anything, did we?
No, I don't think we're going to launch rockets into the sky anytime soon, are we? But in today's day and age, you probably learn a new skill set, Mike, that you wouldn't usually have.
The problem at my age, Corey, I'll have forgotten it in 10 minutes' time.
It'll probably change very, very quickly. And how are we coping with the lockdown 2.0?
I'm coping better with that than I am with the weather. When you tell me where you were, up in the sunny north, and I think if you were in Melbourne, mate, you would never, well, you'd leave straight away. It's freezing here. But I suppose if you've got to be in isolation, you might as well do it when you're too scared to go outside.
Yeah, correct. Well, we are very fortunate up here that we're getting a lot of football at the moment. My Kangaroos aren't exactly setting the world on fire at the moment, but I do try and get to as many games as I can because I actually treat it as a real privilege more than ever before to have that honour of actually going to the footy, having a drink of beer out of a plastic cup, and just being able to watch the footy is something that I think everyone down there would appreciate.
Well, it is weird. I mean, we've got heaps of footy, but it's all on telly, and you just miss that part about sort of saying, look, someone, guess who's playing next week, let's go, and we can't do that. But I must say, it's funny. I used to be able to set my calendar on the football program. You know, the first game was a Friday night and it would end on the Sunday night. Now sometimes I'm saying, now what day is it? And why are we playing tonight? We're playing sort of, I think, effectively every day of the week for about 4 weeks.
What are your, and just on that, we have touched on the game. And look, I think the players are doing an unbelievable job, I think, at the moment. I know that people see the players and they go into a hub and everyone thinks, oh, that'd be great. But having been in that position as a player and knowing the disruptions to everyone's daily routine and how much that throws you out of whack, it's really, I don't know, what are your thoughts on where, I know we're jumping up and down about the quality of the game, but all things considered, what are your views on how the game's being played and where it's all at the moment?
Well, I think on the hub part first, I think I have sympathy with the players because it's a marked departure from what they're used to. But you and I have both got an interest in golf, and I play a fair bit of tennis, and I'm talking about what those blokes, the tennis players and the golfers and the cricketers, I mean, they're just continually on the road. That's their job. That's what they do. So I don't want our blokes to complain too much about having to reside in Queensland in far better weather and with their mates and play football, say, you know, every 4 or 5 days. I don't think in the overall context that that's an arduous demand.
Correct.
But read the footy. I really enjoyed Gold Coast and St Kilda. That was one of the better games I've seen, and I think a lot of us are just really keen for Gold Coast to do well after all the lean years that they've had. There's been some good games, but I'm not a fan of the modern game. And I rarely say that. Whenever I was working at the Herald Sun or on Fox Footy and people asked me about the standard of football, my constant answer was, the best of today's game is better than it's ever been. And I think largely I still believe that, but geez, we're watching some rubbish. And not because they can't play, but because of the way that the game is played and how it's allowed to be played. And I think we're just a bit tired of the soccer set up in fact that everyone moves in a mass, and then the malls when there is a sort of a neutral situation, we just have 30 players around the footy.
Yeah, it's amazing when you sit at the footy, and when I was sitting up high watching the North Melbourne Geelong game the other day, and then you're right, it happens so quickly in games of football where all of a sudden you've got 36 players right inside 50. Like, how do you fix it?
Yeah, and the umpires are getting the blame, and that's probably logical with the prior opportunity and holding the ball and incorrect disposal. But it's impossible to rule on that. I mean, it's such a subjective assessment about whether you've had an opportunity to get rid of it. Should we protect the bloke who wins the footy? Do we reward the tackler? I can't understand so many people pushing to reward the tackler and remove prior opportunity. I just think that's contrary to the spirit of the game. If you're good enough to go after the footy and win it, I think if there's a neutral situation, you should get the benefit of the doubt.
Agreed. And I would have thought, Mike, when the way that I know I grew up playing football, and the way that we've always seen it, if you drop the ball, you drop the ball. It doesn't matter whether you've had prior opportunity. And I think that's my biggest frustration. It does. I mean, if you're actually making the play, I think it's a very simple rule to adjudicate that's become unbelievably complicated.
It is really complicated, and we've overcorrected. I've heard people say this, and I've always been of this school of thought. No one goes to the football to watch someone tackle. And I think we want to allow the players, like the great players like Martin and Dangerfield and all those guys who attract us to the footy, to give them some chance. I mean, they work their bum off to get to the football and win it. There's got to be some leeway if there's a perfect tackle and the ball spills free. My view about that, the reward for a good tackle is the ball spills free and it's 50-50 again. And that's what I've always believed that, but I think we've gone too far the other way.
We have, but we'll get on to more positive things, Mike. And so where did your love of football come from? Like, if you started way back when in your journey into football, where did it all originate for you?
Well, the short answer, I think, Corey, is it was the cradle. I mean, I've never lived a day where football hasn't been a part of my life. I mean, I learnt to read, and my passion for English was born out of my love for football, because I would just devour any and every football story that was in the papers from when I was a kid. The Sun at the time and the Herald in the afternoon, and back then it was more occasionally the Age, but I just couldn't get enough of football. On the radio shows, down the track TV, but fundamentally newspapers. And I can't actually remember when it started. I think I was probably, as soon as I could read, I was into the newspapers and then into the footy. And, with the things that kids do today, but are less sophisticated than my time, collecting cards, getting autographs, and just thinking that you're in the presence of God every time you saw a league footballer.
And would that be like even advice to a lot of people nowadays? Is that just stemming to basically finding something that you absolutely love and you're so passionate about, and that's what in essence you did? You just followed your passion. That, yes, getting paid to do it was just a bonus in the end.
I think so. And I mean, I remember my first job was at the local paper at Werribee, and you would be familiar with Werribee. It was when I was growing up, it was a sort of like a country town, 20 miles from Melbourne. And I worked on the local paper at 17, and I was playing footy with Werribee when they were in the VFA, or they still are. But so I started in the under-19s, then played in the seniors there, and I still can't come to terms with it, mate. I used to critique the blokes I was playing footy with, and I'd sort of, when I was in the under-19s, I'd be writing about the blokes in the seniors and bagging them for what I thought they did wrong. And I'd go to training on the Tuesday and the paper came out on the Thursday, and there'd be all the local paper lying on the trestles when the blokes came in for training. And half the team wouldn't talk to me because the stuff that I'd written about them that day. And I don't know where that came from, because you probably know this because you know me quite well, I'm a fairly sensitive soul, and I don't take too kindly to criticism. And here I was at 17 and 18 bagging the blokes in the seniors. But that was sort of, that was the forerunner of what I became, I guess. I've spent 50 years in the journalism business, and almost exclusively covering football.
And then who were the ones that, you obviously started in Werribee, but was there anyone that really took you under your wing, or there were people that, gave you, if you look back now, that really gave you a start, or someone that you wanted to emulate?
Well, probably a bloke called Alf Brown, who was even before your time.
Yeah.
He used to write for the Afternoon Herald, which was a broadsheet newspaper in Melbourne, came out in the afternoon and sold 500,000 copies a day, which in today, kids today just couldn't believe that because they don't read papers anyway. But to think that there was 500,000 copies coming out in an afternoon paper every day of the week. So Alf Brown was the preeminent football writer. and there was guys by the name of Barry Bretland and Kevin Hogan and others that worked for the Sun, and Percy Beams, the former Melbourne champion who worked for the Age. So I think what it was just something, you're right before, that was just the passion, and I was able to sort of, adapt my passion to work, and just because I had such an interest in it, I just devoured everything they did, and I learned virtually on the way. I didn't even do year 12, Corey. I was at the end of year 11 at Werribee, and a mate of mine lived next door to the bloke who just bought the local paper. And he said, well, do you want to come and, see how you go over the school holidays? So I did. It was notionally for 3 weeks, and I stayed for 5 years. And that was just the start of the journey. That
was the start of a 50-year journey. Now, you speak of some of those, the more the old school reporters and the guys that you learnt off. Do you think the old school code is now completely gone in today's day and age?
It's a good question. Look, it's hard to have a black and white answer about that. Alf Brown, who I mentioned before, he had his mates. He had lots of mates at footy clubs. I mean, I think the trade-off was that I'm sure he sat on some stories that were detrimental to his buddies, but in return, he got the best stories from them. And that's how it's worked, in all my time in it. There's a few trade-offs, and there's a few conflicts. And I think this view about lots of journos sort of espouse this view of how pure we are and we play no favourites and, we're uncompromising. That doesn't happen. In real life, there's things that we... It's an uneasy alliance between people in footy clubs and journos, because when the big story comes, the journo says, look, I've got to write it. It's such a big story. Yeah. And the person in the footy club will sort of say, well, geez, I've been looking after you for a while. Can't you sit on this one for me? So that's the judgment you have to make.
But then that also sort of leads me into the next one. How do you feel about the current journalism, that there's always this desire to be first and not necessarily be right?
Well, they wouldn't agree with that. There's always this desire to be first, but they would think that they wouldn't go to print or go on record unless they believe they were right. Yeah. I mean, I've got to say this. Every time I lecture journalism students, which I do quite regularly, I say, look, one of the things that you've got to live by is this saying that if in doubt, leave it out. But that didn't apply to me when I was working. There were many times when I wrote stories that I was sort of 99% sure about, but it's the 1% that you're not sure about that worries you. And, I made some blues. I wrote some things that didn't happen, that I said would happen. But you can't wait. You can't wait until you lock it up and it's 100% sure and everyone's agreed to it, and then you're ready to run, because someone will gazump you. I mean, Caroline Wilson's a good example. She's a very good journo, but she misses plenty of times because she takes a few risks, and it depends who you listen to. Sometimes the person that you're listening to will tell you something's going to happen, but they're not quite sure. So it's easy for them to sort of say something's going to happen, and knowing in their mind that there's still a bit of doubt about it. My famous one, the one that that haunts me, is I said that Alistair Clarkson was going to coach West Coast just before Simo got the job.
Yeah.
And I think West Coast had said to the person who told me, we'll go after him and we're going to pay him what it takes, right? But the other ingredient that I didn't lock away was what Clarko's attitude to it was. And I'm sure they went to him and made him this offer, but he decided to stay at Hawthorn. So I had egg on my face over that.
Yeah. And then how do you, I suppose in your own mind, how do you get that balance between, I want to be first and I want to do this, but there could be that hint that I might muck this up?
Well, I think it's like whatever we do, we get better at it as we go. And I think you become smarter. In my case, I think you become a little more conservative, and probably you sort of constantly in fear of getting it wrong. Therefore, you tick more boxes to make sure that it's right. But it's fluid, mate. Sometimes
as I said, you can talk to one person who assures you that something's going to happen or has happened, but they've got it wrong. And if they're passing it on to you and they're a trusted confidant and their record's pretty good at getting it right, you tend to go with them, but they might be 100% sure in their own right. When the story comes out, they'll sort of say, yeah, look, I wasn't, that's not how I understood it. So I guess it's just learning as you go who you can trust and how close you have to convince yourself that you are to the truth.
Yeah. And I suppose, which leads me to the next one, what would you say would be your toughest day on the job? There's a story that you had to cover that was really, really hard to write.
Well, probably the toughest ones when we get to a situation and we treat football, you did as a player and I did as a journo, that sort of it's life and death. And we know it's not, but while it's happening, it is. But I remember I wrote big stories, interview stories with Jimmy Steins, Sean White, Wayne Gordon, certainly those three, all knowing that they were probably going to die. All of them had cancer and all did die and all died at a young age. And I think when you're facing up to someone across a table in their kitchen or wherever you are in an office and talking to people, I remember Jimmy talking about, it was almost like he was just going to refuse to die. But we were talking about things like, here's this Brownlow medalist and this magnificent story of an Irishman who came across the world and became a hero in Australia, and talking about the things he would do to try to preserve his life, things like drinking his own urine and other things that he would do. And when you sit down and you talk to people like that, that's when you know that that's sort of heart and soul stuff.
Yeah, it would be. Now, you touched on it before when you had your teammates at Werribee, but is there anyone that you've genuinely feared after you've actually written a story? Because I could imagine you would have had some pretty angry phone calls, or in your case, you're out socially and someone fronts you socially. So yeah. Is there a few people that would stick in your mind?
Yeah, there's a couple. There's two that jump out. One was Plugger. And Roger Merritt was another. And so I've fought out of my weight division with those two. But I remember, can I swear on this show?
Oh, yeah, a little bit, yeah.
It's just a little bit. Anyway, the kids in prep school talk about it these days. So a bloke called Robert Hessian was a lawyer and Plugger's manager when he was at St Kilda. And I wrote a story one day after Plugger rearranged Peter Caven's face. Do you remember that incident?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
And I wrote that I'm not sure. This is in the Sun, the Herald Sun. That I'm not sure that Plugger's good outweighs his bad any longer. And he took exception to that because we know what his good was. He was certainly one of the best players that we've ever seen. And anyway, so Hessian rang me at the paper a couple of days later, and he told me who he introduced himself. Who I knew him anyway. Just told me who he was, and he said, look, we're not having this conversation, Mike. He said, but if Plugger sees you at the footy, in the car park, in the street, he's going to kill you. And I remember I just went limp. I thought because I knew that was literally what Plugger would have said. And I had this fear for years that Plugger would get me in a headlock like he used to like to do on the footy field and just squeeze the life out of me. So Plugger was one. Roger Merritt actually attacked me physically in Cape Town in South Africa one night. We were over there for a pre-season game. It was Brisbane and Freo, and Merritt was with Brisbane. And he might have had one or two frothies too many. And actually, so there's a group of blokes sitting around at the table after dinner, late at night, and he launched across the table and wrapped these big mitts around my neck. And mercifully, Dipper and Scotty Clayton and a few others were there, and they peeled him off. But that was a bit scary. Dakes took a swing at me one night at a 3AW Christmas party. And I thought, I actually, isn't it funny, because of who Dacos was, and I understand that, because he's much bigger name than I was. But this is Blue. Dacos throws a punch, hits my shoulder and slides up and sort of, hits me on the cheek. And I got thrown out, right? So I said to myself, I'd had a fair few beers this day, but I remember being dragged out with a security guard, got me in a headlock and dragged me out of this function room at Rod Laver Arena. And I'm saying to myself, I'm mid-50s and I'm getting thrown out of a Christmas party. I've got to have a good look at myself here.
That would have
And
been
there are others. I mean, there's plenty. Look, when you do what we do, you are going to cross people. I mean, I hate being criticised. So when I sort of put myself in the position of sort of we're addressing, when we're critiquing what players do, and sometimes we're pretty savage with that. And I mean, they say, you would have said it too, the players, we never read the paper, but they do. And if they don't, their mates can't wait to tell them about it. And I understand why they get angry, because if you're being criticised by someone in the paper, you're probably not playing well. So you're worried about that, and then you're worried about sort of that public, not quite humiliation, but sort of, that embarrassment that you have when you're bringing the subject of some bloke in the paper who you blokes love to say, well, what would he know? He never played anyway.
This episode is brought to you by National Make Good Solutions, experts in taking your commercial property back to the day it was built at the end of your lease. Yeah, I think that over the journey, I would have seen that, yes, I think that you've got a strong opinion on things, but I think you get the balance right. And I think amongst many of the players that's why you are highly regarded amongst all the players. But was that also one of the things that maybe hurt to do with the podcast recently about knowing, do you know what I mean? Knowing that you have got that high regard amongst all of us as past players, and then all of a sudden thinking that, shit, I might have done the wrong thing here.
Yeah, well, two parts of that. I don't think I did the wrong thing. Yeah. I think in any other time it was probably I'm not quite sure why we discussed it, but Don Scott wanted to talk about it and we did. But I definitely don't think it was racist. And it was just a bad. There's no good time to be seen to be racist, but it just came and it was a couple of weeks after George Floyd had been murdered, and the Black Lives Matter was a big issue and an issue that should be big too.
Yeah.
But what hurt me most about that, Corey, I paid 33 grand out yesterday to settle the business with Nicky. We were ordered to pay 100 grand in damages, and that hurts too, because that's not a bad amount of money to have to just pull out of your pocket and give to someone else. But I think the thing that hurt me most is the way that the reaction of a lot of people who I thought were reasonable work acquaintances and even a couple of friends that made a judgment that led to them calling me and Don Scott and Sammy racist and the other things like that. And I hoped that a 50-year body of work would have probably cut me some slack, but it didn't seem to. So that was, I'm probably, I was hurt and angered by that, because, I don't think my history says that I pick on minority groups, or that I have a nasty streak that I want to sort of embarrass anyone. So, I mean, the lesson is that if you do things with Sam and Don, but particularly Sam, you're at risk because he doesn't care about convention. Like I love working with him because he's so funny, and we've got a 40-year history. But geez, he can get you into trouble. I remember saying to him, he was the bloke. Sam said in a podcast that we were doing, I think a week after George Floyd was, I'd say was murdered. He called him a piece of shit. Now, a lot of people agreed with Sam about that, but my point to him was, look, can't you express the same view? Can't you convince people of what your view is without being so intemperate with your language? Can't you just sort of say, look, he was no choir boy or something like that? But he's got this desire. I think he loves shocking people, and he did that then. But the odd thing is, in the Winmar stuff, he was virtually innocent. But there's so many people who are angry with Sam and have lost respect for him, that I think
there was an outpouring of emotion and vitriol, just because people saw, well, these three guys have stuffed up here, so we're going to dump on them, and they did.
Yeah, they certainly did. Now, and I have been one of the guests. How many guests have we had on open mic over the journey?
Well, this is its 11th year. I started doing the show, probably doing one every 3 or 4, no, not 3, every 8 or 10 weeks in the first couple of years. And then the boss at Fox at the time, a bloke called Rod Law, said, if this show's going to get any traction, it needs to be weekly. And so there I'm thinking, well, just how weekly? How can we do 25 a year? Well, we've been doing 25 a year for, I think, about 8 years now. We're up, the number of people in total that I've interviewed is about 220.
Yeah.
It's a big number, isn't it?
It's a big number. So just for everyone out there, go behind how much preparation goes into making that happen, because I know even through doing these sorts of interviews that you want to be prepared and you want to find new angles about what people do. But I'm sure everyone out there would want to know, what's the process in terms of, once you decide that you've got a guest, how long does it take to do your preparation so that when you're on camera, everything just flows and it comes out the right way you want to?
Yeah. Well, say I interviewed you, and I know you. I know the Corey McKernan, the footballer, because I've probably watched you play, I don't know, 70 or 80 times. But the essence of the program, as I see it, is to tell people what they don't know about the footballer.
Yeah.
And therefore, I do all the stats stuff. I make sure that I know totally when you started, how many games you played, what the highlights were, all that sort of stuff. And then I would probably speak to, say, 2 or 3 people who know you better.
Yeah.
Say in the case, it might be someone who recruited you, or your captain, or say in your case, I might have spoken to Duck about you. And I like to get a feel for the individual who, when he's not wearing his footy gear. So I would say I would probably spend 3 to 4 hours in research, which doesn't sound a lot, but I can do the statistical stuff inside an hour, and then I might have, say, 4, 5, 6 phone calls about people, and that adds to it. I would, if I were talking to someone at North, if I was planning to do them and I crossed paths with you, I'd sort of say it was Swatter. I'd just sort of say, Corey, what are your fondest memories of Swatter, or what made him the player he was, or those sort of things, and then you just piece it together from there.
Yeah. Who's if you could have one guest that you haven't had, who's and this is a loaded question, by the way.
You know the answer to this, don't you?
Yes. So I'm asking a question I already know the answer about, and that's why I'm
That's good, Corey. If I can give you one, that's good. You should never ask a question you don't know the answer to, because you sometimes get surprised and get thrown. Now, I would. I've always said that I wanted to do Tony Lockett, probably because it would be edgy and because he fascinates so many people, and he's almost reclusive. But I think if I had to all do them in order, I'd have the Duck. I'd have Wayne Carey at the top, because A, he's the best player that I've seen, and I've said that for years. And B, it's such an interesting, colourful story. And and I know if Duck were prepared to talk, he talked to you. I wish I could get him and have him as open as he was with you. But just about what made him who he was, and his early days, which weren't smooth, and things that have happened along the way. And regrets. I love asking people who have got the Carey history what they regret most. And sometimes it's really revealing about the things that they would do if they could have their time over again.
Yeah, they definitely was someone like. Look, I think he knowing him pretty well, he is genuinely chuffed about the fact that you put him at number 1. But it's how we get him in the chair, Mike. We've got to work on him, get him on there.
Yeah, well, as much as that fed his ego when he was number 1, no, I haven't pushed him, Corey. I just know if I were him, I'd probably say the same thing. So look, there's nothing for me to gain out of that. You might say what a good footballer I was and where you rated me, but there's things that you have to ask me that I'm not prepared to sort of talk about on the public in the public forum.
Yeah. How do you think you would have gone? Your daughter Kate ended up playing for the Tigers. That's correct, isn't it?
No, played for Collingwood.
Collingwood. Sorry, that was my bad.
No, she's working with the Tigers, but she played for Collingwood.
Correct. How do you think, if you were in your prime in the Herald Sun and you had to write about your own family, wouldn't that be an interesting dynamic?
Yeah. Well, so be more specific. Do you mean write about Kate the footballer?
Well, yeah, write about a footy career, and you had to critique her like you've had to critique many of us.
Yeah. Well, I wish you were that. I wish I had that problem, mate. I wish you were that good. You know, I don't know if you know Kate Stewart. She played one game at Collingwood. Yeah. It was her first possession, and she went to change direction, put the leg down, the ACL blew up, never played again. And for what it's worth, when she was 15, she was like Erin Phillips at 15. She was a star, but the women's footy didn't come for another 20 years, so she never got to play when she was sort of at her best. But that's all I'm saying. Again, I was envious of her. I mean, she has been on the ground in an official AFL fixture, and even at my age, I still regret that. I still have this sort of yearning to have done it. Even to have just sort of run out and not got a kick or been knocked out. It was just to have been out there. I don't think you blokes understand how lucky you are. I know you're very talented and worked hard, but blokes like me who grew up in Victoria, particularly in my era, that's all they just wanted to do was to play footy. So getting back to the professional part, if I were to critique her, of course it's not easy. It's not easy actually bagging anyone, Corey. That's sometimes you have to do it with people that you like, and you have to make observations that they're not going to like. And I think that it's the human nature, and it says that we are a bit softer on people we regard as our friends. I wouldn't deny that. We don't treat everyone equally. But the funny thing about that is every time you cook someone, it's amazing how soon you see them afterwards. I don't know why that happens, but sometimes I just can't believe that you'll turn a corner and say, I haven't seen this bloke for 5 years. Like, I bagged him last week, and there he is today. And I've had, I worry sometimes when people sort of say, look, you're unfair, which is subjective, I know that, but, or you didn't understand that I had an injury or whatever. But I think what we would say as journos is that if you present yourself and you're playing, we're entitled to think that you're fit and you're able to give your best.
Yeah, that's right. Now, we do the name of what we talk about in this whole series that I've created is called Fork in the Road. Now, where would you, if you had to look back over the journey, that was your fork in the road moment, that life has either gone either way or obviously gone for the better? If you had to look back over the journey and say, right, that was my fork in the moment that saw me go to another level.
Okay, good question. It probably goes all the way back to when I was working at the fabled Werribee Banner. I'd been there for 5 years, and there was the Age had decided to start an afternoon paper called Newsday. It was in 1969. So what was I? So I was 22 then. So the paper's starting. There's a mate of mine used to work at the Footscray Mail, so we used to cross paths a bit because we do local councils and courts and that together. And he said you should apply for a job on that paper. And I said, oh no, they're not going to. Well, I wouldn't get a job. I mean, I just work at the Werribee Banner and blah blah blah. And he said, he persisted with me, and I was genuine about that. I said, look, I wouldn't hardly get a job in a metropolitan newspaper. And he said, well, go and apply for the job. He was so I applied, and people say this often. You'll often hear people, but this is literally true. A bloke, I went in and had an interview, and this guy who was the editor said, He said, we've got one more spot on this paper, and I think I'll give it to you. And I got the job at Newsday. Newsday lasted 6 months, but I performed reasonably well. Went to Hobart when the paper closed. Could have gone to Sydney. Went to Hobart because they played football there. Became the chief footy writer at the Hobart Mercury. Again, lucky. The bloke who was there before me was old and retired because he was about 70-something, which isn't all that old these days. But he retired, took his job, came back to Melbourne, worked on inside football, and then went on the Age, and then, you know, things unfolded perfectly for me from there.
And it's interesting, even talking to you, that you started at the Werribee little local newspaper.
Yeah.
Like Eddie Maguire, he started at I think it was the Macedon Gazette. Do you find, I think.
Sure about that?
He told a little bit of a furphy and said that he was going to get signed up by Channel. I think, that he ended up telling Channel 10. That was what he told us on our little series that we've done.
Did he really?
He did. But what I was going to say is, do you find nowadays that a lot younger people are less likely to take the hard road and pay the dues? It's like they want instant success rather than, you've got two humble beginnings. You've got yourself and Eddie Maguire starting at the little local newspaper and working your way up. Do you find they want to skip all those steps and go straight to the top?
Probably, yeah. I reckon that's a reasonable observation. The other thing I think what's changed now is that blokes in their 20s almost become opinion writers and people who like to think they can set the agenda. We would never have done that. We wouldn't have been allowed to when I was young because you had, as you said, use that term, pay your dues. You had to work through the ranks. I think they're probably going a bit quick these days. And because Twitter gives them this forum, I mean, they're all on Twitter and you can say what you like on Twitter. And you can be Eddie the expert or you can bag who you want. So I think that's probably created that syndrome of, I'm here and I've been working in this business for 3 years and I'm entitled to an opinion. And, and sometimes I think there's a risk that the journo can be seen to be bigger than the story and part of the story. And we're not. I've always said that. I mean, journos in my time, like Sheahan, Wilson, now Mark Robinson, they've got a profile of their own, but we really are just the messenger. What we should do is we've got access to people who the public's interested in, and we get to watch big events, but all we are doing is taking that story to the masses.
Yeah, correct. Now, another part that in this series that's been a big favourite of mine is we talk about the photos that mean the most to people. I mean, we've had some great photos thus far that everyone has come up with, and what is the favourite picture of or pictures, I believe in your case, that mean the most to you?
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned that to me this morning before we came on, those photos, and I'm pleased to say that the one that I instantly mentioned to you and I will show you is a picture of me with my 4 kids. And because I remember there was a time when I would have sort of said, here I am with Ian Stewart, and here I am with Diesel Williams, and here I am with Wayne Carey and Corey McKernan. But I think I was just really pleased that my instinctive response was that it was a family thing.
Yeah.
Although there's a second one, if you want a second one, it is me being hoisted up on the shoulders of Jonathan Brown and David King at the Fox end of season party in 2018, I think. And I mean, I like that because I mean, as I said to you before, I still have this that butterfly feeling when I'm with footballers and talking to football, not to the point of just being subservient, not having an opinion, but just, I don't know why. I've always regarded you guys as sort of demigods, and then I find out, and I meet a few of you, and I find out you're not. But but I do have that. So that's a favourite. I mean, Brownie and Kingy, I'm friendly with both, and I like both of them. So there'd be the 2 photos that I would offer up.
And what are speaking of the footy? What are the things? Well, what are the things that you're missing most about the footy? About just having that journey to go to the MCG, which, by the way, probably has the media room not named after Mike Sheahan. So
it's at AFL House.
AFL House, sorry.
The one at North Melbourne is the one at the MCG is in honour of a former North Melbourne president, Corey, Ron Casey. Yeah. Yep. And I'm at Marble Stadium. Look, I must say my enthusiasm for sort of getting ready to go to the footy and being there and then the 10 minutes before the ball's bounced, that's evaporated a fair bit. A bit like this footy that we're watching at the moment. I've always sort of believed that, you can have too much time in the chocolate factory. It's nice having a chocolate bar and then having another one, but you get to the point where you say, look, I couldn't eat another one. I'm a bit like that with the footy. Yeah. I love the build-up during a week when there's a massive Friday night game or a game on the Saturday, and there's that sense of anticipation. And for obvious reasons, we're not having that now. But I miss the one-on-ones. When two big names are playing. And everyone talks about Van der Haar and Knights, and I saw that game, and it was a brilliant contest. But I know we can't have that all the. But I love seeing great footballers in a situation where they can show their skills. And I don't think there's just too many things that mitigate against them now. I mean, I was watching, as I said, Gold Coast and St Kilda last night. We're talking about the development of the two King boys. Now, I wouldn't care if Duck was playing last night. If you've got packs of 8 and 10 and 3 opposition blokes coming over punching your arms in the football, it's impossible almost to assert yourself. Unless you're Carey, you can't. But then we saw someone like Rankin. I can't believe how good that kid is. There's kids come through all the time that are great. But I want to see Dusty Martin and Dangerfield. Too early to say Rankin and Rowell, but players who are different, that just make you want to watch them play and make you look at them to say, how can they do that? Like Dusty is clearly the best player in the competition, and probably, he's nearly as good as midfielder as I've seen, I reckon. Midfielder who can play forward.
Yeah.
And I don't even know Dusty, but I love watching him play. You?
You haven't got him for an open mic yet, have you?
No. Well, I don't do blokes who are still playing because their life story can change in a hurry. Like they could do a knee or they could change clubs. So my unofficial rule is to wait until they finish.
Well, hopefully that'll be a few years away still. Do you reckon?
Yeah, there'll be someone else doing it then, Corey. It might be you. If this series goes well, you might be taking my seat over.
I won't be taking your seat anytime soon. Now, my final question before we wrap it up: how do you want Mike Sheahan to be remembered? What's his legacy?
What's his legacy? I think it's pretty simple. I think I would like to think that people thought I worked hard, was fair, had a passion for what I was talking about, and basically probably made a contribution that might have improved the status of footy writers. Does that sound a bit sucky?
No, it's not sucky. It's 100% spot on.
The part about being fair, not always, maybe, but certainly over a long period, and that's what you mentioned it before. I think I like that players who played the game are positive about how they thought that I operated in my sphere when they were playing. So, that. And I did work hard. And the other thing in Corey, without being, and I'm not, you don't even have to respond to this. I'm not being coy about this. I don't have a lot of talents, plural. I mean, I've got, I worked hard at something that I loved and was lucky enough to get involved in. So I owed the job that, because I've got no idea what I would have done if I hadn't have been a sports journalist. And an interviewer, which I like. I mean, if you were to ask me about the facet of my professional life that I enjoyed most, I reckon it is open mic. Even though I spent so much time in print. I mean, I worked at The Age, The Sun, The Herald, and The Herald Sun. So I sort of saw it from morning and afternoon on both sides of the divide in journalism in Victoria. But I love doing open mic, and I love sort of pressing people and trying to. You and I have talked about this before. It was just not so much they're there because of what they've done on the football field, but to try to sort of expose them, not expose them in a negative way, but to tell people what they're really like. And I've had some people. I would have had, I reckon, 10 or 12 blokes who shed tears on the program. And, you know, there's a joke in the office that when someone will say, "Who have you got?" and I'll mention, they'll say, "Any chance of tears?" Because, you know, in telly, they love that. But I like it because it means that people are really laying themselves bare, you know, and there were so many of them. And Dennis Banks talking about Darren Mullane, John Kennedy talking about his little baby that died, and he had his fingers on the baby's neck just to see if there was a pulse. Merv Cain talking about losing his daughter and then his wife in the space of 21 days. Alan Stoneham, whose son went to jail for murdering his ex-girlfriend. You know, stuff like that. Now, I don't mean to sound like I'm a ghoul and I live on people's misfortunes, but I like, as I said, and I'm repeating myself, but just that thing about who they really are and what they're like Monday to Friday, which is real life.
Well, I think, Mike, on behalf of everyone that has probably done it before, and I think speaking on behalf of a lot of ex-players, I know that you always feel like with you that you get that balance right between, yes, you can have an opinion, but I think there's also others in the game that are still in it that I think go way too far. I think it bears testament to you. You wouldn't have so many guests come on there if you didn't have that respect and you didn't have that. That's what I get back to. It just comes back to that respect that people are happy to go on there and open themselves up, because if they didn't trust you, they wouldn't do it.
Well, that's nice, Corey. And I think that's right. I accept that. It's nice to hear. It's flattering, but I think it's pretty accurate too.
Yeah. Well, look, on behalf of everyone out there, it's a big thank you once again, everyone that's watching Fork in the Road. We got there in the end, despite our technical difficulties, and you've actually learnt a new skill in Lockdown 2.0. Actually, you've learned a new skill. You just rang your daughter and she sorted it out.
That's an old skill, mate.
Yeah.
It's great to talk to you, and I hope the show goes well. I've enjoyed it.
No, really good, mate. Really good to sit down and pick your brain, and hopefully we've extracted some gems out there that everyone can listen in, and we'll see everyone next time on Fork in the Road. Thank you.